Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't falling in love. It's choosing to stay when everything tells you to run. David had been living the same routine for 6 months now. Wake up at 7, coffee black, check emails, work on graphic designs until his eyes hurt, microwave dinner, watch TV until he fell asleep on the couch. His apartment felt more like a cave than a home, and honestly, he was getting tired of his own company. The divorce papers were still sitting in his desk drawer, even though everything was final. Sometimes he'd catch himself reaching for his phone to text someone who wasn't there anymore. The silence in his place was so thick you could almost touch it. Even his neighbor's dog barking next door had become a welcome sound, just to know other living things existed nearby. That Tuesday morning started like any other, until he heard the moving truck rumbling outside his window. David peeked through the blinds and saw workers carrying boxes up to the apartment right across from his. The old guy who used to live there had moved out last month and the place had been empty ever since. He wondered what kind of person would want to live in this tired old building where the elevator only worked half the time. When he stepped out to grab his mail, he nearly dropped his keys. There she was, directing the movers with paint-stained hands and the biggest smile he'd seen in months. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore an old flannel shirt that looked like it had survived a dozen art projects. What caught his attention wasn't just how pretty she was, but how alive she seemed, like she had energy to spare. "Careful with that one," she called to the movers, pointing at a canvas wrapped in bubble wrap. "That's my favorite disaster." David found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. She noticed him watching and gave a little wave. "Sorry about all the noise," she said, walking over. "I'm Alex, just moving into 4B. "David, 4A, he managed, suddenly aware he was still in his pajama pants. "No problem about the noise. It's actually nice to hear something different around here." She laughed, and the sound was like opening a window in a stuffy room. "Different is definitely what I do best. Fair warning, I paint at weird hours and sometimes I play music too loud. Sounds better than my current entertainment, which is mostly my upstairs neighbor's terrible taste in late-night movies." "Oh, you mean Tommy?" "Yeah, he introduced himself yesterday by apologizing for his action movie obsession. Seems sweet, though." Alex wiped her hands on her shirt, leaving new paint streaks. "What do you do, David from 4A?" "Graphic design, mostly logos and websites for small businesses. Nothing too exciting." He realized he was actually having a conversation with someone new, and it felt strange but good. "Are you kidding? I love seeing how people turn ideas into something visual. I'm more of a throw painted canvas and see what happens kind of artist. But design is like controlled creativity. That takes real skill." David felt something loosen in his chest. When was the last time someone had shown genuine interest in his work? "What kind of painting do you do?" "The messy kind," she grinned. "Abstract stuff mostly. I paint feelings, if that makes sense. Sometimes they're pretty. Sometimes they look like a rainbow exploded, but they're always honest." Before he could ask what she meant by that, one of the movers called for her attention. She jogged back over, her energy infectious even from a distance. David found himself lingering by his mailbox longer than necessary, just watching her coordinate the chaos with such easy confidence. The next few days were different. He'd hear her moving around at all hours, sometimes humming, sometimes playing music that drifted through the thin walls. It wasn't annoying like he thought it might be. Instead, it made his own apartment feel less empty, like life was happening nearby. On Thursday, he bumped into her at the mailboxes again. She was wearing paint-covered overalls this time, and her hair had a streak of blue in it. "Accidental or intentional?" he asked, pointing at the blue. She touched her hair and laughed. "Completely accidental. I was working on this piece about ocean storms, and apparently I got a little too into it. My hair tends to become part of the artwork. It looks good on you," he said, then immediately wondered if that was weird to say. "Thanks. Hey, have you lived here long? I'm still figuring out the neighborhood. Like, is there anywhere decent to grab coffee, or am I doomed to that gas station stuff?" "There's a small cafe about 3 blocks down called Corner Grounds. Nothing fancy, but they make real coffee and the owner is nice. They stay open late too if you're one of those night owl artist types." Night owl is an understatement. "I do my best work when the world gets quiet. Thanks for the tip." She paused, studying his face. "You seem like someone who appreciates quiet too." David wasn't sure how to respond to that. Was his loneliness that obvious? "I guess I've gotten used to it." Used to it or hiding in it? The question was gentle but direct, and it hit somewhere he wasn't expecting. Before he could figure out an answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression shifted slightly, like clouds covering the sun. "Sorry, I should take this," she said, but her voice had changed. "See you around, David." He watched her walk back to her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, her shoulders suddenly tense. He could hear her voice through the door, not the words but the tone, frustrated and tired. Whatever conversation she was having, it wasn't a happy one. That night, David found himself listening for sounds from across the hall. Around midnight, he heard music playing softly, something melancholy and beautiful. He pictured her painting in there, turning whatever was bothering her into something visible. For the first time in months, he felt curious about someone else's story. What had brought this vibrant, paint-covered woman to his quiet building, and why did he suddenly care so much about the answer? His routine felt different now, like someone had adjusted the lighting in a familiar room. Same apartment, same job, same life, but somehow it all felt less heavy. Maybe it was just nice to know that across the hall, someone else was awake in the middle of the night, creating something from nothing, turning feelings into colors. David fell asleep that night to the sound of soft music and wondered what tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks had passed since Alex moved in, and David's world had shifted in ways he didn't expect. Their hallway conversations had become the best part of his day. She'd tell him about her latest painting disasters, and he'd share funny stories about his design clients who wanted their logos to pop more, without knowing what that meant. But tonight felt different. Around 8, he'd heard raised voices from across the hall. Alex was on the phone again, and this time she wasn't trying to keep it quiet. He couldn't make out the words, but the frustration in her voice was clear. It went on for almost an hour before everything went silent. David tried to focus on his work, but he kept glancing at his door. Should he check on her? They were neighbors, maybe friends, but was that overstepping? He'd learned to mind his own business during his marriage. Sometimes it was safer that way. Around 11, he heard her door open and close. Footsteps in the hallway, then silence again. He wondered if she'd gone for a walk. Alex did that sometimes when she was restless, disappearing for hours and coming back with stories about late-night conversations with strangers or discoveries in parts of the city he'd never thought to explore. David was reading on his couch when he heard the knock. Not really a knock, more like someone leaning against his door. He muted the TV and listened. Another soft thud, like someone resting their forehead against the wood. "Alex?" he called softly. "Yeah, it's me." Her voice was different, quieter but somehow more intense. Can I come in?" David opened the door without thinking, and his brain just stopped working. Alex was standing there in nothing but a towel, her hair damp from a shower, droplets of water still clinging to her shoulders. But it wasn't the towel that made him freeze. It was her eyes. They were bright and determined and a little bit desperate, like she'd made some kind of decision that scared her. "I've been thinking," she said, not moving from the doorway, "about what you said the other day, about hiding in the quiet." David's mouth had gone completely dry. "Alex, what are you doing?" She leaned against the doorframe and the towel shifted slightly. Her confidence was both terrifying and amazing to watch. "I'm tired of being careful, David. I'm tired of worrying about what people think or what might go wrong, or whether I'm making the right choice. Maybe you should come inside," he managed, glancing down the hallway. "Not yet." She smiled, and it was both vulnerable and bold. "First, I need to know something." "What?" "That phone call earlier? That was my ex calling to tell me I was making a mistake moving here, that I always run away when things get real, that I'll do the same thing to you that I did to him." David felt something twist in his stomach. "What did you do to him?" "I left. When he wanted to move in together. When he started talking about the future, when everything felt too serious and permanent." She shifted against the doorframe. "He's not wrong, you know, I do run. It's easier than staying and risking getting hurt. So why are you telling me this?" Alex looked down for a moment, then back up at him. "Because for the first time in my life, I don't want to run, and that terrifies me more than anything I've ever felt." The hallway felt too small suddenly, like all the air had been sucked out. David could hear his own heartbeat. "Every morning when I see you getting your mail, you look so careful," she continued. "Like you're protecting yourself from something. And I recognize that look because I've been wearing it my whole life. But then sometimes when we're talking, you forget to be careful. And those moments are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." David realized he'd been holding his breath. "Alex, I know this is crazy, I know I'm standing in your doorway barely dressed, probably scaring you half to death, but I need to know if you feel it too. This thing between us. Because if you do, then maybe we can figure out how to stop running together." She straightened up and the towel slipped just a little, but she didn't fix it. She just stood there completely exposed in every way that mattered, waiting for his answer. "Well," she said, and her voice was steady despite everything. "Say something." David looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who painted feelings and collected stories from strangers and had just laid her heart bare in his doorway. She was offering him something he'd forgotten existed. Not just attraction or companionship, but the possibility of being seen completely and accepted anyway. His ex-wife had always been careful too. They'd built their relationship on safe choices and practical decisions. It had felt secure right up until the moment it fell apart. But this felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping someone would catch you. "I feel it," he said finally, his voice rougher than he expected. "I've felt it since the day you moved in." Something in her expression softened. Yeah, but Alex, I'm scared too. I'm scared of messing this up, of not being enough, of watching you leave when things get complicated." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo. What if we were scared together? What if instead of running away from this, we ran toward it? David reached for her hand, and when their fingers touched, something clicked into place. Like a door he'd been keeping locked finally opening. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, let's be scared together." Alex smiled then, the biggest, most genuine smile he'd ever seen. And when she stepped into his apartment and he closed the door behind her, David felt like his real life was finally beginning. The next morning, David woke up to the smell of coffee and something burning. He found Alex in his kitchen, standing in one of his old college t-shirts, waving a dish towel at the smoke detector. "I may have overestimated my cooking abilities," she called over the beeping. David couldn't help but laugh as he reached up to silence the alarm. "What were you trying to make?" "Pancakes. But apparently your stove runs hotter than mine." She held up a pan with what looked like charcoal discs. "I think I invented a new art form." "We'll call it breakfast abstract," David said, taking the pan from her hands. "How about we start with toast instead?" This became their new normal. Alex would appear at his door in the evenings with takeout containers and wild stories from her day. She'd met a street musician who taught her 3 chords on his guitar. She'd helped an elderly woman carry groceries and ended up hearing stories about the neighborhood from the 1960s. She'd discovered a hidden garden behind the library where she now went to sketch. "How do you do that?" David asked one night as they sat on his couch sharing Chinese food. "Do what?" "Connect with people so easily. Make friends with complete strangers." Alex considered this, twirling noodles around her fork. "I guess I just assume everyone has something interesting about them. Most people are just waiting for someone to notice." David thought about his own daily routine. Coffee shop where he nodded at the same barista every day, but had never learned her name. Grocery store where he used self-checkout to avoid small talk. Even at work, he kept conversations professional and brief. "I used to be more like that," he admitted, "before everything got complicated." "Your marriage?" They hadn't talked much about his divorce yet. Alex never pushed for details, but she listened when he was ready to share. "We stopped seeing each other, you know? Like really seeing each other. We were roommates who shared bills and occasionally had dinner together. I can't even remember the last time we talked about something that mattered." Alex moved closer on the couch. "What matters to you, David?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. I used to know, but somewhere along the way I stopped paying attention to what I actually wanted. So pay attention now. What makes you feel alive?" David looked at her, sitting cross-legged in his t-shirt, paint under her fingernails, hair falling in her face. "This," he said honestly. "Right now, talking to you." The smile that spread across her face was worth every risk he'd been avoiding. Their first official date happened by accident. They'd planned to grab coffee, but the cafe was closed for renovations. Then the restaurant Alex suggested had an hour wait. By the time they found somewhere to eat, it was nearly midnight, and they ended up at a 24-hour diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. "This is perfect," Alex declared, sliding into a cracked vinyl booth. "The coffee's probably terrible," David warned. "Who cares? Look at this place. It has character." She was right. The walls were covered with photos of regular customers from decades past. The waitress, Betty, had been working there for 30 years and knew everyone's usual order. Alex charmed her within minutes, and soon Betty was sharing stories about the diner's history while refilling their cups. "You want to know what I love about places like this?" Alex said after Betty moved on to another table. "They're honest. No pretense, no trying to be something they're not. Just good food and real people." David realized he'd been holding his breath, waiting for her to find fault with their failed evening. But Alex had this way of finding magic in disappointment. "I would have taken you somewhere nicer," he said. "Nicer than this? Are you kidding?" She gestured around the diner. "This is real life, David. This is better than nice." That's when he started to understand. Alex didn't want perfection. She wanted authenticity. She wanted the messy, unexpected, beautiful reality of things. Their third week together, Alex convinced him to try something new. "Come with me," she said, appearing at his door around midnight with a bag full of art supplies. "Where are we going?" "The beach. I want to show you something." David had lived 10 minutes from the ocean his entire life, but he'd never been there in the middle of the night. The beach was empty except for the occasional jogger, and the sound of waves was hypnotic in the darkness. Alex spread out a blanket and dumped her supplies. "Sit," she commanded. "What are we doing?" "You're going to paint." "Alex, I can't paint. I do logos and websites. That's completely different. That's exactly why you need to try this." She handed him a brush and squeezed colors onto a paper plate. "Stop thinking about being good at it. Just feel something and put it on the canvas." For the next hour, Alex coached him through creating something that definitely qualified as abstract art. It was messy and strange and absolutely nothing like his usual controlled, precise work. And it was the most fun he'd had in years. "Look what you made," Alex said, holding up his canvas as the sun started to rise. It was chaos, but it was his chaos, blues and grays that somehow captured how he felt sitting next to her as dawn broke over the water. "It's terrible," he laughed. "It's honest," she corrected, "and that makes it beautiful." But not everything was perfect. Alex's spontaneous nature sometimes clashed with David's need for plans. She'd want to drive somewhere 3 hours away on a Tuesday evening, forgetting he had work the next morning. He'd make dinner reservations, and she'd show up an hour late because she'd gotten distracted helping a neighbor with something. Their first real fight happened because of a party. "It'll be fun," Alex insisted. "My friend Tyler is having people over. You'll like his crowd?" David agreed, but when they got there, he felt completely out of place. Alex's friends were artists and musicians and free spirits who spoke in references he didn't understand. They were nice enough, but David felt like he was watching their lives through a window. Alex was in her element, animated and laughing, switching between conversations in 3 different groups. David stood in the corner nursing a beer, feeling invisible. "You having fun?" Alex appeared beside him during a lull in the music. "Sure," he lied. But Alex knew him well enough by now to see through it. "You want to leave?" They walked home in silence, and David could feel her frustration building. "What's wrong?" she finally asked when they reached their building. "Nothing's wrong." "David, come on. You barely said 5 words all night." He stopped walking. "Those aren't my people, Alex. I don't fit into your world." "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, I'm not like your friends. I don't live for art and music and staying up until 3 a.m. talking about the meaning of life. I'm boring. I like routine and quiet evenings and knowing what I'm doing next week." Alex stared at him. So maybe we're too different for this to work. Are you serious right now?" Her voice was getting louder. "You think because you don't want to talk about postmodern sculpture at parties we can't be together? I think maybe we want different things. What I want is you, David. Not some version of you that fits in better with my friends. Just you." But David's old fears were surfacing. "For now. Until you get tired of quiet evenings and start feeling trapped." Alex was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what happened with your marriage? You both got tired of being yourselves?" The question hit harder than he expected. Maybe that was exactly what had happened. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally. "Then stop trying to find reasons why you should." That night, they talked until sunrise about fear and differences and what it means to love someone without trying to change them. It wasn't their last fight, but it was the first time David realized that arguing with Alex wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of understanding each other better. By the end of their first month together, David's apartment looked different. Alex's paintings hung on his walls. Her books were mixed in with his. There were canvases leaning against furniture and the faint scent of turpentine in the air. His life looked different too. He'd started taking longer lunch breaks to walk around the city. He'd had actual conversations with Betty at the diner and learned that his quiet upstairs neighbor Tommy was actually a retired music teacher. He'd even bought a small canvas and some paints just to see what happened. "You're changing," his friend Charlie observed over lunch one day. "Good change or bad change?" "Different change. You seem awake again." That night, David looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. Charlie was right. Something in his face was different. He looked like someone who was actively participating in his own life instead of just going through the motions. Alex was right there in the doorway watching him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How you saved me without even trying." She came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You saved yourself, David. I just reminded you that you were worth saving." In the mirror, they looked like they belonged together. Different in all the ways that mattered, but somehow perfect because of it. For the first time since his divorce, David wasn't just surviving. He was living, and it was beautiful and messy and completely unpredictable, just like Alex had promised it would be. 2 months into their relationship, David thought he knew Alex's patterns. She painted when she was happy, cleaned when she was nervous, and went for long walks when she needed to think. But lately, something was different. She'd been checking her phone constantly, jumping when it rang, and those carefree smiles were becoming harder to find. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. David was getting ready for work when he heard shouting in the hallway. Not Alex's voice, but a man's voice, angry and demanding. He opened his door quietly and saw a tall guy with an expensive haircut pounding on Alex's door. "I know you're in there, Alex. We need to talk." David stepped into the hallway. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" The man turned, looking David up and down with obvious annoyance. "Who are you?" "I'm her neighbor, and you're being pretty loud for 9 in the morning." "I'm Ryan, Alex's boyfriend." The word hit David like cold water. "I think you're confused. Alex doesn't have a boyfriend." Ryan laughed, but it wasn't friendly. "Really? That's interesting. Because 3 months ago she was living with me in Chicago, until she disappeared one morning with half her stuff and no explanation." David felt the ground shift under his feet. Alex had never mentioned living with someone. She talked about her ex, but always in past tense, like it was ancient history. Alex's door opened then, and she appeared in pajamas, looking smaller than David had ever seen her. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" "What are you doing here, Alex?" "You vanished. You blocked my number. You wouldn't answer emails. I had to hire someone to find you." "You hired someone?" Alex's voice was barely a whisper. "Did you really think you could just walk away from everything? From us? From the money you owe me?" David looked between them, trying to understand. "Money?" Ryan pulled out his phone, showing Alex something on the screen. "The credit card. The one you maxed out right before you left. $15,000, Alex. For art supplies and who knows what else." Alex's face went white. "I'll pay you back. With what?" "You're living in this dump, probably barely making rent. Face it, you're the same irresponsible kid you've always been." "Hey," David stepped forward. "That's enough." Ryan looked at him with pity. "Oh, you don't know, do you? This is what Alex does. She finds some nice guy, plays the free spirit card, gets him to fall for her, then disappears when real life shows up." "How long have you known her?" 2 months? 3? Just wait. When things get too serious, she'll be gone." "That's not true," David said. But even as he said it, he could see Alex backing toward her apartment door. "Ask her about the others," Ryan continued. "Ask her about Ben in Portland or Mike in Denver. Same pattern every time. She's a runner, buddy. Always has been." Alex's door slammed shut, leaving David and Ryan standing in the empty hallway. "Look, I don't want to hurt anyone," Ryan said, his voice softer now. "But she owes me money, and I'm not going away until we figure this out." David felt like he was watching his life crumble again. Everything Ryan was saying lined up with things Alex had told him herself. She'd admitted she ran from relationships. She'd mentioned moving around a lot. But hearing it laid out like this, like a pattern of destruction, made it sound different. That evening, David knocked on Alex's door. She didn't answer, but he could hear music playing inside, the sad kind she listened to when she was painting her feelings. "Alex, we need to talk." "Go away, David. I'm not going anywhere." Ryan told me about the money, about the other guys. I want to hear your side." The music stopped. After a long moment, the door opened. Alex looked like she'd been crying for hours. "What do you want me to say? That he's lying?" "He's not. I did max out his credit card. I did run away without explaining. I did the same thing to the others." David's chest felt tight. "Why?" "Because I'm exactly what he said I am. I'm irresponsible and selfish, and I hurt people when they get too close. That's not the person I know." Alex laughed bitterly. "You've known me for 2 months, David. Ryan lived with me for 2 years. Who do you think knows me better?" "You're scared," David realized. "This isn't about the money or Ryan. You're looking for a reason to run from us. Maybe because I should run. Maybe Ryan's right and I'm just going to hurt you too." David wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but doubt was creeping in. What if Ryan was right? What if this was all just another temporary stop for Alex before she moved on to the next city? The next guy. "The money," he said finally. "How much do you actually owe him?" 15,000. Plus interest. Plus the cost of whatever private investigator he hired to find me. "Why did you take it?" Alex sat down on her couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "Because I'm an idiot. Because he offered, and I had this opportunity to show my work in a gallery, but I needed supplies and framing and entry fees. I thought I'd sell some pieces and pay him back before he noticed. And the gallery owner was a scam artist. Took my money and disappeared. By the time I figured it out, I'd spent everything and more." David sat beside her. "Why didn't you tell Ryan?" "Because he would have said exactly what he said today. That I'm irresponsible and naive and I never think things through. And he would have been right. So you ran. So I ran. Like I always do." They sat in silence for a while. David thought about his marriage, how problems had piled up until they seemed impossible to solve. How he and his ex-wife had stopped talking about the hard things until there was nothing left to talk about. "I can't be with someone who's going to disappear," he said finally. Alex nodded, not looking at him. "I know. But I also can't be with someone who won't fight for us." She looked up then. "What does that mean?" "It means if you want to run, I can't stop you. But if you want to stay, really stay, then we figure this out together. The money, Ryan, all of it. David, it's $15,000. I wait tables part-time and sell maybe 1 painting a month. It would take me years to pay that back. Then it takes years. But you pay it back honestly, not by running away." Alex was quiet for a long time. "And us? What happens to us while I'm trying to clean up my mess?" David thought about that. Could he trust someone who had a history of running? Could he build a future with someone who might disappear at the first sign of real problems? "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I want to try." 2 days later, Ryan appeared at David's door. "She's going to hurt you," he said without preamble. "I thought you should know that before you get in too deep." David let him in, curious despite himself. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because I've been where you are. Head over heels for someone who seems amazing until reality hits. Alex is like a beautiful storm. Exciting and intense and completely destructive." Ryan sat down uninvited. "When I met her, she was everything I thought I wanted. Creative, spontaneous, passionate about everything. But living with her was like trying to hold on to lightning. You never knew what version of her you'd get from day to day. That doesn't sound like the Alex I know. Give it time. When things get stressful, when life gets boring, when you need her to be steady and she can't handle it, you'll see what I mean." David found himself really looking at Ryan for the first time. He was handsome, successful looking, probably everything Alex's parents would want for her. But there was something bitter in his eyes, something that spoke of disappointment and control. "Did you love her?" David asked. "Of course I loved her. Why do you think I'm here?" "No, I mean, did you love her or did you love the idea of her?" Ryan was quiet for a moment. "What's the difference?" "The difference is whether you wanted to change her." That night, David found Alex on the roof of their building, a place he didn't even know existed until she showed him. She was sitting on the edge, legs dangling, looking out over the city lights. "Ryan came to see me," he said, sitting beside her. "Let me guess. More warnings about how terrible I am. Actually, it made me realize something. I think you and Ryan were wrong for each other from the start." Alex glanced at him. "What makes you say that?" "Because he talked about you like you were a problem to be solved. Like your spontaneity and passion were bugs instead of features. Maybe they are bugs. Maybe I am too much for normal people to handle." David took her hand. "Alex, look at me." She turned, and in the dim light he could see tears on her cheeks. "You're not too much. You're not broken. You're not a problem to be solved. You're human, and humans are complicated. But I hurt people. I make bad decisions. I run when things get hard. So we work on that. Together. But I'm not going to pretend you're perfect, and I'm not going to try to change who you are. Alex wiped her eyes. What if I can't change? What if running is just what I do? David squeezed her hand. Then I guess we'll find out. But Alex, I'd rather risk getting hurt with you than play it safe with someone else. For the first time in days, Alex smiled. Not her big, radiant smile, but something smaller and more real. I want to stay, she whispered. I want to try. Then we try. But even as they sat there holding hands under the stars, David couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest challenges were still ahead of them. 6 months later, David was learning that love wasn't just about the beautiful moments. It was about choosing each other even when things got messy, which they had repeatedly. Alex had gotten a second job at a local art supply store to help pay back Ryan faster. She was exhausted most days, working doubles and still trying to paint in whatever time she had left. David watched her pushing herself to the edge, and sometimes he wondered if this was what Ryan had meant about her being destructive. But then he'd catch her humming while she made coffee at 5 in the morning before her early shift. Or find little sketches she'd left on his bathroom mirror, and he'd remember why he'd fallen for her in the first place. Alex wasn't destructive. She was just intense, and intensity came with a price. The real test came on a Thursday in March. David's ex-wife called. Hi, David, it's me. He hadn't heard Lisa's voice in almost a year, not since the last of their paperwork was finalized. She sounded the same, controlled and careful, like she was reading from a script. Lisa, this is unexpected. I know. I've been thinking about calling for months. David, I made a mistake. He sat down heavily on his couch. What kind of mistake? Leaving. Giving up on us. I know why I did it at the time, but I've had a year to think, and I realize I was scared. Scared of how different we'd become. Scared that we'd fallen into a rut we couldn't get out of. David looked around his apartment. Alex's paintings covered the walls now. Her books were scattered on every surface, and there was a half-finished canvas propped against the window. His life looked nothing like it had when he was married to Lisa. Where is this coming from? I've been in therapy. Working on myself, figuring out what I really want. And what I want is to try again. With you. David felt like the ground was shifting again. Lisa, I'm with someone now. I know. I drive by sometimes and I've seen her. The artist, right? The fact that Lisa had been watching his building felt creepy, but he pushed that aside. Her name is Alex. Is it serious? David thought about Alex working 2 jobs to pay off debt from a relationship that ended badly. About the way she still sometimes got that look in her eyes like she was planning an escape route. About Ryan's warnings and all the ways this could still fall apart. Yes, he said. It's serious. David, be honest. Is this really love or is it just different? Because sometimes when we're coming out of a bad relationship, we mistake excitement for compatibility. The words hit uncomfortably close to home. His relationship with Alex was definitely exciting. It was also challenging and unpredictable and sometimes exhausting. Was Lisa right? Was he just confusing passion with love? I have to go, he said. Think about it, okay? I'm not going anywhere this time. When you're ready to talk, really talk, call me. When Alex got home that night, she found David sitting in the dark. Bad day? She asked, dropping her bag and turning on a lamp. Lisa called. Alex went very still. Your ex-wife? What did she want? To get back together. David watched Alex's face carefully. He expected anger or hurt or jealousy. Instead, she just looked tired. And what? What did you tell her? That I'm with you. Alex sat down across from him. That's not what I asked. David realized she was right. I told her it was serious between us. But what? David, there's a but in your voice. I can hear it. He was quiet for a long moment. She said something that got me thinking. About whether what we have is real or if it's just different from what I had before. Alex nodded slowly. And what did you decide? I don't know. We've been dealing with so much drama lately. Ryan, the money, you working yourself to death. Sometimes I wonder if we're building something real or just surviving crisis after crisis. Alex was quiet for so long that David wondered if she was going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sad. Do you want to know what I think? Yes. I think you're scared. I think we both are. And I think when people get scared in relationships, they start looking for exits. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? Lisa shows up offering you a second chance at something safe and familiar, and suddenly you're questioning everything about us. David wanted to argue, but Alex wasn't wrong. Lisa represented everything his relationship with Alex wasn't. Predictable, stable, uncomplicated. Maybe I am scared, he admitted. Of what? Of this being too hard. Of you deciding it's too hard and leaving. Of us burning out from all the stress. Alex leaned forward. David, do you remember what you told me that night on the roof? You said you'd rather risk getting hurt with me than play it safe with someone else. I remember. Did you mean it? David looked at her. Really looked at her. She was wearing her work clothes, paint-stained and tired. Her hair was pulled back messily, and she had dark circles under her eyes from working too much. She looked nothing like the polished, put-together woman Lisa had always been, but she also looked real, present, like someone who was choosing to be here despite how hard things had gotten. Yes, he said. I meant it. Then stopped looking for reasons to give up on us. The next morning, David did something he'd never done before. He called in sick to work and spent the day thinking, really thinking about what he wanted his life to look like. He thought about his marriage to Lisa, how safe it had felt, how rarely they'd fought, how everything had seemed perfect on paper. He also thought about how lonely he'd been, how they'd stopped really seeing each other, how their life together had felt more like a business partnership than a love story. Then he thought about Alex, about midnight painting sessions and burned pancakes and fights that ended with better understanding. About the way she looked at him like he was someone worth seeing. About how she'd challenged him to live more fully, even when it was uncomfortable. By evening, he knew what he had to do. He found Alex at the diner where they'd had their first real date. She was sitting in the same booth, sketching in a small notebook while she waited for him. Sorry I'm late, he said, sliding in across from her. No problem. I was just drawing Betty. She has the most expressive hands. David looked over at the waitress who'd become their friend over the past months. Betty caught his eye and waved, smiling. Alex, I need to tell you something. She looked up from her sketch, and he could see worry in her eyes. I called Lisa back today. Alex's hand tightened on her pencil, but she didn't say anything. I told her that what we have isn't just different from what I had before. It's better. It's real. And I'm not interested in going backward. Alex's shoulders relaxed slightly. And how did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. But that's not really the point. What is the point? David reached across the table and took her hand. The point is that for the first time in my life, I'm choosing love over safety. I'm choosing mess and complications and uncertainty because it comes with you. Alex's eyes filled with tears. David, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. We still have Ryan's money to deal with, and your tendency to run when things get hard and my tendency to overthink everything. But I want to deal with all of that together. Even if I mess up again, even if I make more bad decisions, even then, because Alex, I'd rather have a complicated life with you than a simple life without you. She squeezed his hand. I love you too. I didn't say I loved you. Alex grinned, and there was that radiant smile he'd fallen for. You didn't have to. 3 months later, they'd found their rhythm. Alex had paid back half of what she owed Ryan, who had finally stopped checking up on them. David had learned to embrace spontaneity, and Alex had learned the value of planning ahead sometimes. They still fought, but they fought better now. They still faced challenges, but they faced them together. One evening, David found Alex painting in their bedroom. She'd moved in officially the month before, and the apartment was now completely transformed. Her art covered every wall, her books filled every shelf, and somehow the chaos worked. What are you working on? He asked. She stepped back to show him the canvas. It was abstract, like most of her work, but he could see figures in it. 2 people, intertwined but distinct, painted in colors that shouldn't work together but somehow did. It's us, she said simply. Different but better together. David wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood there looking at the painting. No regrets? He asked. About what? About staying. About choosing this mess over something easier. Alex leaned back against him. David, easy was never going to make me happy. Easy was just going to make me safe. And safe isn't the same as alive, and you feel alive. With you? Every single day. 6 months after that conversation, David proposed. Not with a fancy dinner or elaborate plan, but on a Tuesday morning, while Alex was making coffee and humming off key. He asked because in that moment, watching her be completely herself, he couldn't imagine wanting to spend his life with anyone else. Alex said yes before he'd even finished asking. Their wedding was small and slightly chaotic, just like their relationship. Alex wore a dress she'd painted herself, and David's vows made half the guests cry. Betty from the diner catered, and there wasn't a single moment that went according to plan. It was perfect. As they danced to music playing from someone's phone in their tiny apartment, surrounded by friends and family and walls covered with Alex's art, David realized something. Love wasn't about finding someone who never challenged you. It was about finding someone worth being challenged by.